And the title of my presentation today is Paulo Freire and Global Citizenship Education from Service Delivery to Critical Consciousness. And so today I will share three main points with you. The first one is I will examine the question, what is global citizenship education and what is critical consciousness? And then explain why it is important to educate critical global citizens based on Paulo Freire's vision of critical consciousness. And so based on these, I will argue that the type of global citizenship education, and by the way, when we're talking about global, we're talking about also the local, because the local and the global are strongly interconnected. So when we're talking about global and local citizenship education, we need in the future, I would argue that this is based on critical values. And so from a critical perspective, some of the central orientations of global citizenship education are promoting social justice and a reduction of global and local inequality. And so the aim of a critically oriented global citizenship education is then to assist our learners in reflecting critically on their opinions and to assist them in being part of the creation of a new future with its roots in social justice and sustainability. And so this encompasses, at least in my opinion, 6 key elements. The first one is de-colonialism. The second one is caring ethics. The third one is ecocritical views. The fourth one is global moral consciousness. Number 5 is autonomy and carefulness. And number 6 is humanity empowerment. And I will conclude my presentation later on with a brief summary of the main points discussed today. And then I will give you an opportunity to ask me questions about the topic of global citizenship education, Paulo Freire, and critical consciousness. So there are 6 key elements that I will illustrate today in terms of implementing critical global citizenship education. And before I get into that, I would actually just briefly, let me come back here. I would like to share with you a brief introduction of 2 concepts which are central to my presentation. And so the first concept is the concept of global citizenship education. So global citizenship education is concerned with developing the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that learners need to be able to contribute to a more inclusive, just, and peaceful world. This is according to UNESCO. And what is critical consciousness? It focuses on achieving an in-depth understanding of the world, allowing for the perception and exposure of social and political contradictions. And so critical consciousness also includes taking action against the oppressive elements in one's life that are illuminated by that understanding. So specifically, Paulo Freire refers to critical consciousness as the ability to intervene in reality in order to change it. And so notions of critical consciousness and global citizenship education, where we're talking about critical global citizenship education, are strongly interconnected. And so in my presentation today, I will be speaking about 6 elements that based on my research work I did with international scholars are strongly interconnected with the notion of critical global citizenship education as it connects to developing learners' critical consciousness in global citizenship education. And so let me address the first element, decolonialism. So the type of critical global citizenship education I propose in this presentation promotes decoloniality and diversity rather than neutral universal subjectivities. Globalization, unfortunately, is asymmetrical, and there is not an equal balance of power between the global north and the global south. And so I contend that the problems that must be addressed are those of injustice and inequality, and not only poverty or development. So in this view, I do believe that a critical global citizenship education demands that educators develop a critical literacy, helping learners to undertake an analysis of their preconceptions, positions, and as well as identity as they relate to the complexities of local and global structures. And so we must develop in our learners the so-called hyper self-reflexivity, with the pedagogical focus on the census that would help and assist learners in dealing with complexity and what I call paradox. Let me now address the second element, caring ethics. So critical global citizenship education promotes Saint Ignatius' concept of cura personalis in Latin, or caring ethics, while supporting learners to care for individuals and human rights as a foundational pillar. So from this perspective, I suggest that educators' approaches to a critical global citizenship education must be founded in compassionate ethics and attempts to comprehend, understand, and analyze and find solution and resolution for the contemporary crisis of migration, for example. And so this type of critical global citizenship education is an approach that represents a pursuit of holistic education encompassing outcomes that include, for example, spirituality, art, aesthetics, ethics, as well as ambitions towards the creation of peace, in line with the UNESCO Commission report of Jacques Delors titled Learning, the Treasure Within. And so this emphasizes, in my opinion, the importance of living in harmony with one another and with the rest of our planet. In connection to this, let me address the third element of a critical global citizenship education towards the development of critical consciousness in our learners. And the third element is an ecocritical perspective. A critical global citizenship education encourages ecological consciousness and supports learners to examine the injustice created by humanity's perception that we are the supreme being on earth. But this is, of course, not right. And by swapping out the ego for eco, we can move the focus away from a humanic or a human-centric or humanistic-centric attitude. And so this means that one of the objectives of the critical global citizenship education is to foster in our students ecocritical consciousness that considers the environmental and social impacts caused by human decisions effectively indivisible. And so in this context, I thought that was interesting to bring in the notion of more than human, which describes the more substantial ecological relationships that prevail on Earth, exclusively based on those systems that are only focused on human relationships. And so the more than human notion, as it connects with my discussion on critical global citizenship education, is central because it encompasses and includes rocks, soil, forests, streams, animals, and plants, to make the point that the notion of interconnectedness goes beyond human beings and comprises indeed all living beings. And therefore, in my discussion on critical global citizenship education, I advocate for an eco-pedagogy oriented towards fostering consciousness about the intertwined human-environment relationships that demand an amalgamation of education for and through social and ecological justice. Let me address the fourth element for critical global citizenship education, global moral consciousness. So the global moral consciousness element of a critical global citizenship education I suggest in this presentation encompasses the cultivation of a type of humanistic consciousness that transcends national, ethnic, geographic, and religious boundaries. And so this is an approach that consists of an awareness of other perspectives and the single humanity as the primary level of community, and the moral conscious to act for the good of the world. Let me address now the element number 5, autonomy and carefulness. I propose a vision of critical global citizenship education as being modes of thought and action with the basis in the connection of humanity with autonomy and carefulness as central pillars. And autonomy herewith does not mean that the student is separate from society. Rather, it involves educators cultivating the student's relationship with others. So their support must develop the student appreciation for the notion of carefulness towards the other. And so here we bring in all the notion and importance of diversity, respect for diversity. And this more broadly refers to the influence of the individual situation. And he proposes that it is possible to be responsible for one's personal life and philosophy. And so in this perspective, humanity is a foundation that allows our learners, at least hypothetically, to improve their human potential by reflection and indeed critical dialogue, acquiring the necessary resources for living a worthwhile and contributive life based on the notion of carefulness, living in harmony with others on the basis of a moral code, and assisting others in living in valuable ways. So let me now address the sixth and last element, empowering humanity, which is central to our discussion today on critical global citizenship education and the work of Freire on developing critical consciousness in our learners. I do believe that empowering humanity requires a critical approach to global citizenship education that opens a path for the personal improvement of every student. And so the term is often used interchangeably with collective emancipation because both entail waging a struggle against inequality. However, here I'd like to point out a subtle difference because collective emancipation stresses the flattening the power relationship that exists between groups. On the other hand, when we're talking about empowering humanity, this would extend beyond the political level by embracing all aspects of human behavior. And so a critical global citizenship education, as the one I propose in this presentation, must therefore emphasize an interpersonal dimension which recognizes the human drive to live harmoniously and responsibly with others. And so this extends in two directions. as our students desire to contribute to and by others, while simultaneously receiving support from their immediate environment. I therefore believe that the type of critical global citizenship education we need today, and in the future, of course, fosters in our learners critical consciousness based on 6 key elements. The first one is de-colonialism. The second one is caring ethics. The third one is ecocritical views. The fourth one is global moral consciousness. The fifth one is autonomy and carefulness. And the sixth one is humanity empowerment. And so in this perspective, I suggest that a critical global citizenship education, at least potentially, must promote a reorientation of learners' responsibilities towards an orientation that adheres to the belief that knowing without acting is insufficient. And let me conclude with a quote by Paulo Freire, whose writings inspire my work in and for education. The teacher is, of course, an artist, but being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile and can shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. Thank you for listening, and questions are welcome.